I never believed in haunted objects. Old clocks, creaky floorboards, flickering lights. Those were just byproducts of time and neglect. Nothing more. That's what I told myself every morning before I unlocked the door to my late father's antique shop. But that lie unraveled the day I found the pocket watch. It was tucked behind a stack of dusty ledgers, as if someone had purposely hidden it. The watch was heavy in my palm, cool and metallic, with an intricate gear-shaped design etched on the back. The time was frozen, 4:13. No ticking, no hum of movement, just silence. I wound it gently, more out of habit than hope. To my surprise, the hand started to move. Then the phone rang. I flinched at the shrill ring, the sound piercing the silence like a blade. It was the landline, the one we rarely used. I answered, expecting a customer or maybe a debt collector. Instead, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in 15 years. "Henry?" It was my brother Michael. "Is that watch ticking?" My throat dried instantly. We hadn't spoken since the night Dad died. "How do you—" "You need to listen. If it's ticking, it's begun again. Don't let it reach 4:13. "What happens at 4:13? I asked, my voice trembling. But he had already hung up. That night I dreamt of the old grandfather clock that used to stand in our childhood hallway. It chimed 13 times. 13. I jolted awake, heart racing, drenched in sweat. I looked at the watch on the nightstand. It had stopped again. 4:13. I tossed it into the drawer. Maybe it was just a coincidence. Maybe my mind was projecting memories onto a stupid object. But that didn't explain what happened the next morning. Every single clock in the shop, dozens of them, were stuck at exactly 4:13. Even the ones with dead batteries, even the digital ones. I called Michael again, desperate. He answered on the first ring. "You opened it, didn't you?" His voice was tight. "It only opens when someone breaks the silence." "What the hell are you talking about?" The watch was part of a set, made in 1892 by a horologist who believed he could measure time between the living and the dead. But something went wrong. Every time it hits 4:13, something slips through. I laughed nervously. "Come on, Mike, are you saying it's haunted?" "I'm saying it's a door." I didn't want to believe him, but that night I stayed at the shop. I set my phone alarm to go off at 4:12 a.m. I wanted to see for myself. When the alarm buzzed, I sat up, heart pounding in my throat. The shop was dark, save for a faint glow from the watch. It ticked softly, steadily, 4:12 in 45, 4:12:58, 4:13 Huntra. The ticking stopped, and then something knocked on the inside of the shop's lock display cabinet. A slow, deliberate tap, tap, tap. I stared at the cabinet, frozen. The glass fogged slightly, as if someone exhaled on the inside. I backed away, nearly tripping over a stool. "No, nope," I whispered, grabbing my keys and bolting out the door. But when I got home, the watch was in my coat pocket. I know I left it in the drawer. The next night, the knocking happened again. Only this time, it was closer. This time, it was from the mirror in my hallway. I covered every reflective surface in the house. Mirrors, windows, even the oven door. I locked the watch in a safe and shoved it to the back of my basement. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Michael came the next morning. He looked thinner, worn out. "You can't destroy it," he said, reading my expression. "It doesn't work like that." "Then what the hell do I do?" You let it finish the loop. 7 days. You survive 7 nights, and it resets. If you break the cycle, it stays open. Open to what? He didn't answer. He just looked at the covered mirror behind me. Night 3. The knocking grew louder, more aggressive. I started hearing whispers at exactly 4:13. Indistinct, raspy voices, as if dozens were speaking at once from behind the walls. My skin crawled with each syllable, even though I couldn't understand a word. Michael and I stayed awake together in the shop. We watched the hands move. At 4:13, the front door creaked open slowly on its own, even though it was locked, latched, and bolted. He shut it quickly and placed the watch in a ring of salt. "Don't touch it again," he muttered, pale as a ghost. On night 5, something entered. I don't know how else to describe it. A figure, tall, bent, featureless, stood in the center of my hallway at 4:13. My legs wouldn't move. My lungs wouldn't fill. I could only watch. Then, just as silently, it turned and walked into the wall. Into it. Not through. Into. As if the wall had briefly become liquid. Michael found me on the floor an hour later, trembling. "You saw it, didn't you?" he said. "We both did. That's what it wants. To be seen." Night 6. The whispers turned to screams. Blood-curdling, primal screams, like those of someone being torn apart just beyond the veil. I curled in a ball on the floor, sobbing. This wasn't just a haunting. This was a breach. I asked Michael why our family, why this watch. He finally told me. Dad didn't die in his sleep. He used the watch. He tried to stop the cycle, but instead, he opened the door permanently. For a moment, long enough for something to get through. Something that never left. The 7th night, I sat in the middle of a circle of salt, the watch in front of me. Michael sat beside me, holding a hammer. 4:12:50, 4:12:59, 4:13:00. This time, the ticking didn't stop. Instead, the watch started spinning wildly. The hands turned like mad. Every object in the room began vibrating. A wind, cold and sour smelling, swept through us. I screamed not from fear but from the pressure, like time itself was folding. The watch cracked, light burst from it, and then silence. It was over, or so I thought. The clocks resumed normal time. The mirror no longer reflected anyone but me. Michael left town the next morning, swearing never to touch another timepiece again. I buried the watch in a concrete block under the shop's foundation. But some nights, usually around 4:13, I wake up gasping, drenched in sweat. And from the corner of the room, just once, I swear I hear it tick. It arrived on a Wednesday, an unremarkable, grey sky kind of day, the kind you forget even happened. Except I didn't, because when the letter slid through my door's mail slot, it sounded louder than it should have, like the house had inhaled when it touched the floor. The envelope was thick, yellowed with age, and addressed to me in a sharp, elegant hand I recognized immediately. Uncle Francis, the same man we'd buried 4 days ago. There was no return address, no postage stamp, just my name. Inside, one piece of parchment, 5 words, written in a trembling ink line. "Do not trust the clocks." My fingers went cold. I read it again, certain it had to be some prank. But no one knew my uncle's handwriting like I did. I used to study it as a child, fascinated by the loops and flourishes, the way his T always looked like a miniature gallows. He was a horologist, an antique clock restorer by trade, but a recluse by nature. He lived alone in that looming 3-story house in East London, surrounded by ticking ghosts of time. That house was now mine. I hadn't planned to visit, but now I felt pulled, no, summoned. The air inside the house hadn't moved since he died. You could feel it, thick, unmoving, as though every molecule had been told to wait. Dust clung to everything like skin, and the ticking was unbearable. Not synchronized, not orderly, just ticking, random, uneven, overlapping, like the heartbeat of something sick. I stood in the entryway, not yet ready to close the door behind me. The house didn't feel empty. It felt occupied, but not by anything visible. I walked past the staircase, my footsteps echoing in muffled reluctance. The clocks lined every surface, mantles, shelves, high corners of the walls. Their faces watched me. Some were cracked, some pristine, but none of them agreed on what time it was. One grandfather clock's pendulum was frozen mid-swing, defying gravity. Another ticked backwards in slow, deliberate strokes. My uncle's workshop was in the basement, always locked when I was younger. Now the key was under a loose floorboard by the kitchen door, just like I remembered. I hesitated before going down. My skin itched as I turned the doorknob. The basement door opened before I touched it. The steps creaked like old bones. I descended with slow caution, flashlight in one hand, the other gripping the coal banister. The workshop was massive, far larger than I remembered. Shelves stretched from floor to ceiling, packed with clock parts, brass gears, enamel faces, tiny screws, arranged in jars like preserved insects. And in the center, surrounded by darkness, sat the clock. It stood nearly 7 feet tall. The wood was black walnut, carved into twisted vines and grotesque figures, some with missing eyes, others with mouths sewn shut. The pendulum, thick and heavy, was trembling, not swinging. Trembling, like something inside was trying to push out. I reached for it instinctively, and when my fingers grazed the glass, a static shock knocked me back. I hit the ground hard, gasping. The pendulum suddenly began to move, slowly, tick, tock, tick, but not in time with anything else. I felt dizzy, then I heard it, a second heartbeat, not mine and not human. I decided to sleep in the guest room that night. I didn't tell myself it would be just for one night. I already knew I wouldn't be leaving anytime soon. But sleep was a luxury the house didn't grant. At 3:17 a.m., a sharp crack woke me, like wood splintering under weight. I sat upright. The ticking in the house had stopped, all of it. And then it resumed, all at once, like a thunderclap of time reasserting itself. I stepped into the hallway and immediately saw him, a man at the far end of the corridor, facing a tall mirror. He wasn't looking into it, he was looking through it, through the mirror, into the hallway, into me. I froze. He wore a long coat, black as ink, and his posture was too rigid, like a puppet whose strings were pulled too tight. I blinked. He was gone, but the mirror remained. As I approached it, my reflection didn't appear. Not at first. Then slowly, behind the glass, my face emerged, but distorted, like water moving under skin. A handprint formed on the inside of the mirror, pressing outward, and I stumbled back, gasping. The air in the hallway had dropped 10 degrees. I found the journals in a hidden drawer beneath the workshop floor. Dozens of them, dating back to 1939. My uncle wasn't the first horologist in the family. Our bloodline had passed down the trade through generations, each more obsessed than the last. But it wasn't about clocks. Not really. It was about what the clocks could do. According to the journals, certain antique clocks didn't just tell time, they held it, like vessels. And within those vessels, memories, entire lives, could be trapped. One passage stood out. You don't find these clocks, they find you, through blood, through silence, through ticking. I turned the page. A sketch of the same grandfather clock I'd seen in the workshop. Except in this drawing, the door was open. Inside, not gears, but a person, or something shaped like one. Eyes wide, mouth stitched shut. The next page was torn. My stomach turned. I couldn't breathe. And behind me, faint but unmistakable, I heard the soft creak of a floorboard shifting. The house no longer obeyed logic. I'd go upstairs, then end up back in the basement, open a door to the kitchen, and find the front hall instead. My phone stopped working. The battery read 96% for hours, then died instantly. When I looked at the wall clock in the living room, the second hand moved only when I blinked. I screamed for help out the window one night, but no sound came out. My voice left my mouth but never reached the glass. I began hallucinating, or so I thought. I saw my mother, dead 5 years now, standing at the bottom of the stairs, crying without sound. I saw myself in reflections I hadn't walked past, and always, the ticking. Sometimes soft, sometimes thunderous, like a storm inside the walls. I tried to smash one of the clocks once. It bled. Thick black liquid poured from the crack. It smelled like rotting metal. And then I passed out for 4 hours, only to wake up with the clock perfectly whole again, sitting back on the shelf, ticking like nothing ever happened. I stopped trying to sleep. My skin crawled constantly, and my thoughts no longer felt like mine. One night, I found a photograph in the workshop drawer. It was a family portrait. 4 people, my great-grandfather, my uncle as a child, and 2 others with blurred out faces. Behind them, the same grandfather clock. I flipped the photo over, in faded pencil. They walked in with us. They never left. I returned to the basement. I needed to destroy the clock. I brought gasoline, matches, my last thread of sanity. But the moment I poured it on the base, I heard voices whispering from inside, one of them sounding just like me. I froze. Then it spoke again, from inside the wood. You are the new key. I dropped the match. It fizzled. The fire wouldn't catch. The room grew darker, but the lights hadn't gone out. I realized the shadows were spreading, moving, reaching. I managed to escape, or maybe the house let me. I don't know anymore. The door was open one morning, no ticking, no voices, just silence. I ran, no bags, no goodbye. I drove until I ran out of gas, found a motel, slept in a shower stall with a light on. I thought it was over, but time doesn't end. Not like that. 3 weeks later, I received another envelope. No return address. Same handwriting. Inside, a tiny clock key and one sentence. Your time will turn next. I keep it in a drawer I never open, but I still hear it, every night, the ticking below the floorboards, waiting, remembering. The day had been unusually grey, one of those damp Saturdays where clouds hang low like dirty cotton above the rooftops. Alan Whitmore zipped up his coat as he slipped away from the crowded farmers' market in the town square, turning instinctively into a back alley he usually avoided. It was narrow, lined with forgotten brick, and stank faintly of mildew. The kind of alley that makes you feel like someone's watching from a window that shouldn't exist. Alan wasn't sure why he'd gone that way. Maybe it was the noise, the people, or maybe it was just the pull of routine breaking itself. But halfway through that dim corridor, he stopped cold. There, nestled between two shuttered stores he knew had been empty for years, was a small shop he swore had never been there before. The brass letters on the warped wooden sign read, V. Hallberg, horologist. Below it, dusty windows framed the most curious display Alan had ever seen. Rows of antique clocks, all ticking, all alive. Some grand, others dainty, but all oddly synchronized. He took a slow step forward. He had lived in this town for over 20 years. He knew every crack in the pavement, every business on this street. And yet, here was this place, glowing faintly amber in the shadowy alley, as though it had simply grown out of time itself. The moment Alan pushed the door open, he felt as though he'd stepped underwater, sound warped. Even the chime of the tiny brass bell above the door seemed muffled. The shop's interior was warm, dimly lit by amber-shaded sconces. Every surface was wood, dark, polished, old. Clocks lined every wall, shelves, and even hung from the ceiling. Some ticked loudly, others whispered. And behind the counter stood the clockmaker. The man looked like he belonged in a painting. Hunched posture, bone-thin frame, snow-white beard trimmed neatly, and a grey wool vest that buttoned all the way to his neck. His eyes, sharp and pale blue, were fixed on Alan the moment he entered. "You heard it, didn't you?" he asked. Alan paused, slightly unnerved. Heard what? The calling. Time always calls those who are out of balance. The words chilled him, though he couldn't explain why. Alan gave an awkward chuckle and stepped toward the nearest display, a glass case of silver pocket watches. That's when he saw it. One of the watches had a deep scratch down its face and a worn brown leather strap. The back was engraved with the initials RW. He staggered a step back. That's impossible." The clockmaker nodded, almost mournfully. "Is it?" Alan's father, Richard Whitmore, had died in a house fire when Alan was 17. It had been brutal. A freak electrical spark ignited the old curtains, and within minutes the house was engulfed. Alan had survived by leaping out his bedroom window, but his father had been trapped in the downstairs study. They found the body days later, charred, curled in a fetal position, clutching something metallic that had melted into his hand. That object was the very watch now sitting before him, whole again. "I lost that watch in the fire," Alan whispered, reaching out. "Or perhaps it found its way back through a door you've left open," the old man said cryptically. Alan looked up, panic rising. "What do you mean, door?" The clockmaker's eyes seemed to shimmer. "Time is not a line, Mr. Whitmore. For some, it's a circle. You have come full turn." The moment Alan's fingers touched the watch, a low thrum pulsed through the air. All the clocks stopped. Not a single tick remained. And in that sudden silence, Alan heard something else. Something that didn't belong in this century. The crackling of fire and the faint, terrified scream of his father. Alan wanted to run, but his legs betrayed him. The shop twisted around him, walls stretching and melting into blackness. Smoke filled his lungs, even though he was still inside the shop, or so he thought. He now stood at the foot of the old staircase from his childhood home. The carpet was burnt to ash. Photos on the walls were warped, faces distorted from heat. Every step creaked beneath his shoes. But when he turned to leave, the shop was gone. It had never been there. "Dad!" Alan called out, his voice hoarse. "Dad, I'm here." There was no response, only the dragging sound of something moving in the hallway above. Slow, deliberate, like heavy boots over cinders. Alan's chest tightened. He remembered this night. The guilt. The door he locked when he thought something was in the hall. He hadn't seen a person. He saw something else. Something wrong, wearing his father's face. A whisper drifted from the stairwell. "You left me. Alan, why did you leave me?" Back in the shop, but not really. Alan now sat slumped in the wooden chair across from the counter. The old man continued winding the watch, but his hands blurred, as if working at unnatural speed. "People forget," the clockmaker murmured. "Time remembers. It keeps the wounds fresh." Alan's fingers gripped the arms of the chair. Sweat poured from his temples. The clocks around him began ticking again, but not in harmony. Each one ticked a different rhythm, fast, slow, erratic, a chorus of madness. "You said I stole time," Alan groaned. "You did. You closed the door on someone else's seconds. You locked them in flame. You ran, then buried it for decades. I was a child. No." The clockmaker's voice deepened. "You chose." A cold gust swept through the shop. Alan looked down. His father's watch was now strapped to his wrist, burning into his skin. The heat was real. The numbers on its face twisted, showing not time, but memories. Moments Alan had hidden even from himself. Alan screamed, not in pain, but in recognition. He remembered locking the study door. He remembered his father's fist pounding on the other side. And he remembered a voice whispering to him not to open it. A voice that wasn't his own. The clockmaker leaned in close, eyes glowing faintly. "There are prices, Mr. Whitmore. All debts are paid in time." Then the clocks stopped. One last time. Alan's body jerked upright. His mouth opened as if to speak, but only silence escaped. Then slowly, his face slackened. His eyes went dim. He slumped back, unmoving. On his wrist, the watch ticked, perfectly, quietly. The bell chimed. A teenage girl stepped in, brushing rain from her coat. The shop was warm, quiet. The old man stood behind the counter, polishing a golden watch with care. She looked around, puzzled. "Weird. I've never seen this place before." "Most haven't," the clockmaker said, not looking up. "I lost my grandfather's pocket watch. It disappeared years ago. It had his initials. GL. The man smiled kindly, then pointed to the glass display behind him. "Would it be this one?" Her breath caught. Behind him, the shelf held a gleaming gold watch engraved with GL, ticking softly, ready.